Hey, with your evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it. Mason walked slowly down the street, thinking about his own thoughts. Today he intended to go to his mother's grave, and for that he had to get flowers. That was a shame. There was nothing to buy them with. The weather was overcast. The air smelled of grayness and rain. Mason didn't like days like this. Like most vagrants, he had to make a living by collecting, not by looking for cardboard or some other recyclable material for the weather. It was extremely hard, though not all of Mason's fellow hobos preferred to gain their sustenance through physical labor. Why would I want to go through dumpsters and trash on the day of mourning? Is it easier to stand in the crosswalk or at the entrance to the supermarket? People themselves will give you what you need, says a hobo named Noah. No, I'm not ashamed of it. I mean, it's the way it is. It's understandable, of course. Homeless people have no morals. But I'd rather be hungry all day than stand around with my hand out, Mason grinned, hiding a smile in the folds of his lips. He was 10 years older than Mason, and the years spent on the streets were already taking their toll. Noah knew that a homeless man had only himself to rely on, and all means were good for his own salvation. Since Mason had only a handful of change in his pocket, he could not even dream of buying flowers. Suddenly, passing one of the rich houses, the vagabond saw a gorgeous Flowerbed with several kinds of flowers at once. There were gracefully and lilies, and classic roses of different colors and shades, and even daisies growing all around the perimeter of the flower bed. At this moment, Mason experienced a keen desire to pick up a few to take to his mother's grave. The street appeared deserted, which was certainly to his advantage. But what are you babbling about? Take a couple of small ones and it's over. No one will even notice. I don't think the owners of the house are counted here. Mason hurried himself. In his mind, it wasn't a crime or theft, especially if he had the money. He would have bought a bouquet from the grandmother selling flowers at the subway entrance. But today he was broke, which meant he should have acted more decisively by looking around. Mason quickly tore off the locomotive, trying not to notice the pain, wounded, sharp thorns. Fingers on all the guide took no more than a minute and soon clutched in his hand the coveted trophy. Mason walked briskly down the street. He was disliked among vagrants as if he was such a person, who was of no blood, but another with principles and other prejudices in his soul. Mason was brought up in an orphanage, from which he periodically escaped and broke around the city with the same sorby heads. His mother died during childbirth, and the first time the boy met her was standing at her grave, with a cheap monument and a photo on a ceramic plaque. Mason was told about it by one of the caretakers of the orphanage. He was about 15 years old at the time, when Robert took a pupil to the cemetery. That's your mother, Mason, Vanessa Rivakova. I remember when you came to us so small and cried all the time in the accompanying documents. Your mother's name was listed, so I found her. Mason forever remembered the moment of meeting his mother. Of course, talking to the concrete tombstoned him. Teenager did not, especially in the presence of an adult, and therefore wished it mentally. Since then, from time to time, he came to his mother, turning it into a kind of ritual. At first, watching the cemetery, he thought he was a common beggar who came to the graves in search of food or drink. Mourners and relatives would often leave him a memorial meal. This included not only sweets or pyxenia, but alcohol as well. The caretaker watched Mason for a few days, then realized his mistake. Guy went to his mother's grave, maintains the grave and the area around it, perfectly clean. Today, when he arrived, he put roses in a makeshift vase made from a cut plastic bottle. For some inexplicable reason, the boy was sure that his mother would surely like his gift. When he saw the roses in the tramp's hands, the caretaker shook his head respectfully, realizing that he had not gotten them easily. At the same time, the owner of the Flowerbed and the mansion was watching the surveillance video as usual. Kevin has long ago achieved everything that many could not dream of, being the owner of a private plastic surgery center. He had at his disposal several cars, a small staff of servants, and a cottage in the countryside. In the past, Kevin was a surgeon who managed to properly invest the money received from private practice. Of course, he did not open the center alone. Therefore, in this difficult business, did not do without companions. Kevin's wife died many years ago, leaving him no heir. Since then, the medical luminary has lived alone. No, from time to time in his life there were romances, but most of them did not lead to anything serious. By his 50s, Kevin had cemented his image as an incorrigible bachelor who lived for his own pleasure. The only passion of the famous surgeon was flowers, breeding which he was engaged in. This is the second decade. Some of his colleagues, frankly speaking, laughed at Kevin, calling his occupation feminine and unimportant. That's what you need it for. Flowers, seedlings, flower beds, roses, lilies. It's not like fishing or hunting, or at least picking mushrooms or having a sauna. This is gardening, flowers. It's embarrassing to even think about, said the head of the department. But Kevin was not in vain considered a man stubborn and imperious to be led or subject to the opinion of others. The flowerbed in front of the house was his pride. Not a day went by that he didn't take a closer look at it. For this very reason, the hidden camera lens was aimed at the flowerbed, giving its owner the opportunity to view such beauty at any time of day. And now, watching the recording, Kevin felt an incomparable aesthetic pleasure. It is clear only to those who, for once in their lives, put all worries aside and do what they love to do. Suddenly, the profile of a vagrant flashed on the tape, bowing the Senate it so carefully guarded in Kevin flowerbeds. What the hell is this? What kind of people are these? Nothing's sacred, the surgeon exclaimed indignantly. The phrase turned out so loud that we above the floor in the next room shuddered, and from surprise dropped, and mopped from his hands. The metal handle hit the tile with a logical clink, causing Kevin to tear himself away from the monitor screen. Pausing the recording, the man scrutinized the face of the vagrant who had visited himself on his flowerbed. Suddenly it seemed very familiar to him. Where had I seen him before at this moment? Kevin recalled an incident 6 months ago when a young man about the same age as this tramp came to his clinic. The client brought with him a picture of a young man he wanted to resemble after plastic surgery. But the most surprising thing was that the guy in the picture looked a lot like the tramp who worked the flowers from Kevin's flowerbed. But how was that possible? Did the client really want to look like this homeless man? But why? What was the point? Stunned, whispered the doctor. It all seemed so logical that Kevin's head was spinning. He'd also completely forgotten about the incident in the flowerbed and the damage the tramp had done to it. Kevin remembered the client who brought the tramp's picture to the plastic surgery center. It was strange. His eyes were wary, as if he was afraid of something or hiding his true nature. The guy's surgery was a success, and he's practically a copy of the hobo. But Kevin didn't see the point of it now. If he wanted to, he could look up the file cabinet and find out the name of the patient who had brought the tramp's photo. If it had been anyone else, he would never have done that and would have simply considered the photo a coincidence. But it does happen. People who look alike. Kevin knew that the chance of that happening was minimal, which meant this tramp was worth paying attention to. Mentally forgiving the homeless man for the plucked roses, Kevin turned to the home archive contained in his work computer. Soon he had the name of the very client who had decided to become like the street hobo. Max, 25 years old, correcting the shape of the nose and chin, read aloud. Kevin, being the owner of a plastic surgery center, he is used to the fact that people are often not satisfied with their appearance. But for someone to bring a photo with the aim of becoming like someone else, this was definitely the first time in Kevin's practice. When he decided to ask a friend who worked in the police force, the doctor felt that he had found something very interesting. Kevin did not know why he needed this information and why he was so eager to unravel the whole tangle to the end. Perhaps it was his innate curiosity, inherent in all people with an analytical mind. And at the same time, Mason was returning from the cemetery. Of course, the vagabond did not even suspect that the owner of the flowerbed, from which he had not so long ago plucked a couple of times, was already interested in his identity. Nor did Mason even know that a hidden camera was filming his every move. He intended to go about his usual business, reducing everything to finding money for subsistence. Listening to the request, Kevin, the head of the operative search department, thought about it. Ethan, it was not for nothing that he had worked in the police for so many years not to feel a strange whiff coming from this case. The photograph shown to Kevin was familiar to him. He knew it first of all because the guy in the picture was James Gromov, the son of a powerful businessman who had disappeared a few years ago. There was talk of a fishing accident, but he continued to believe that his son was alive. So finding James became his life's goal, and a few months ago the missing son found himself. But his demeanor was a little strange, and his voice was a little hoarse. But John Gromov considered it a consequence of the trauma caused by the accident on the mountain river. And only Kevin, who was sitting opposite the policeman, knew that he had become an unwitting participant in this monstrous scam. After all, it was he who had helped Max to become James Thunder by means of several surgical manipulations with his appearance. Max's motive became clear to him, and the head of the department also caught the essence of the case. Most likely, this swindler decided to take advantage of the situation, and through surgery to become a rich heir. Of course, there was definitely some risk in his actions. But still, considering the condition of the unfortunate millionaire, it was possible to dare such a risky endeavor. Well, that's quite a story, Kevin. It's a good thing you came to me in time. Or else this impostor will send his father to the grave if he hasn't already sent him and inherited his estate. The policeman muttered. The situation with Max became finally clear to Kevin. But how did a vagrant from the street look like the missing son of a millionaire? Could this homeless brother be Gromov's twin James? No, that's a bit of a stretch, Kevin thought. As it turned out later, his appeal to the police played a role in the imposter. Max was apprehended. During the search of the fraudster was found poison, with which he intended to poison his father. Upon learning about the forgery, John Gromov warmly thanked Kevin by shaking his hand. You'll have to forgive me. It was all my fault. If it hadn't been for my operation, this forgery would not have been possible. The doctor said with undisguised regret. But for John Gromov, it was the truth that was most important. The businessman already lived side by side with the imposter for about half a year, pretending to be his missing son. But Kevin had one more trump card hidden up his sleeve, and it consisted in the recording from the video camera, where unknown to him Vagrant plucked flowers from the flowerbed. Mason was very surprised when the police came to his cast, and 3 days after the incident. Hey, what are you guys doing? I didn't do anything. Well, I picked a couple of flowers. The guy excused himself without saying a word. The cops took him to the station. Businessmen John Gromov and Kevin were already waiting for him there. When the businessman saw Mason, he turned pale. God, how much does he look like my James? Just like 2 drops of water. And then, coming to the tramp's amazement, he unbuttoned the collar of his shirt and saw that there was no birthmark on his neck. And when now did John realize that there was an ordinary resemblance, and Mason was not his late son's twin brother at all. The businessman's face showed sincere regret, and tears glistened in his eyes. He had so hoped that the vagrant from the street would be his son who had lost his memory or something else. Only it wasn't him. It wasn't a miracle, and Mason wasn't his son. Just a very similar guy and nothing more. I can be free now, the tramp asked cautiously, still not sure what was going on. Yes, I'll sign the pass. You can go on your way. What did you say your last name was? Asked the head of the department, Rebekov. Readily answered Mason. At that moment, John Gromov shuddered. How did you say? Rybakov, well, yes, Rybakova. I got my last name from my mom, but she died during childbirth. I was raised in an orphanage, Mason explained. John gasped in amazement. At that moment, his entire past flashed before his eyes. When 26 years ago, while on a business trip, he met a woman named Vanessa. The romance between them flared up like a match and, in fact, could not bring the young people anything good. It was a momentary weakness, a fleeting encounter. But be that as it may, on that fateful evening, John and Vanessa became close. Later, they saw each other a few more times, and then parted, leaving a favorable impression of each other. Only now John realized why Mason looked so much like his missing James. The similarity was explained by the fact that the tramp was his son, and the missing James, his paternal half-brother. Of course, no one in the study believed it, especially Kevin, who believed that such coincidences simply do not happen. But there was no stopping the business. Taking Mason by the hand, he led him to the car to take him to the clinic for a DNA test. Still not realizing what was happening, Mason obeyed, not even realizing that his life could change. The test results had to wait a few days, but this could no longer affect John's attitude towards Mason. The businessman felt it was his son, and his expectations did not deceive him. Unable to contain his joyful cry, John hugged his son, who was born after a stormy affair with Valentina. Kevin was the happiest of all, because it was from his Flowerbed that the investigation of this very complicated case began. After all, if Mason had not decided to pick the roses, then never in his life would never have found his father and helped him in the most difficult period of his life. If you like the story, I hope for your support with a thumbs up button is one click for you. But for me, it's the best kind of gratitude. Good health to you, and all the best.